Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission here is simple. We take the sack of source material you've gathered, strip away the noise, and give you the quickest, most thorough path to deep understanding.
And today, we are opening up the files on a man whose voice, I think, has become almost more famous than his writings.
It's achieved this kind of digital immortality.
Yeah.
Decades after he died. We're talking about Alan Watts.
That's right. Born in 1915, a British-American writer and speaker who, you could argue, is the single most influential popularizer of Eastern thought for the modern West.
I mean, his cultural longevity is just staggering. He died in 1973, but you hear his lectures everywhere. They're sampled in indie music and heavy metal.
STRFKR, Architects. Yeah.
You hear him in the Marvel series Loki, the movie Her, video games. He's this foundational voice of the counterculture, for sure. But his real legacy seems to be as this auditory philosopher. His work just completely transcended the page.
And that's really what we're digging into today. He called himself not a guru, not an academic, but a philosophical entertainer. So the mission is to unpack that. How did this man manage to interpret and, popularize Buddhist, Taoist, and Hindu philosophy for a massive Western audience?
Especially for that emerging Beat generation and the whole counterculture movement.
Yeah.
And he was doing it all while kind of operating on the fringes of academia and formal religion.
It's an incredible story. Our sources track this journey from a very curious English childhood through all these academic and even religious detours,
Right.
to his sudden fame on West Coast radio, his explorations with psychedelics, and of course his notoriously complex personal life.
And what's so fascinating, based on the materials, is that he wasn't just, translating old texts. You call him a master synthesizer.
He absolutely was. He understood the Western mind. He took this ancient wisdom and he connected it to the most cutting-edge ideas of the 20th century. Things like general semantics and, believe it or not, early cybernetics.
Cybernetics. Wow, okay, so he was a bridge builder, not just East and West, but spiritual and technological.
That's the perfect way to put it.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Understand the soil where this philosophical seed was first planted.
So Alan Wilson Watts, he was born January 6, 1915, in a little village called Chislehurst in Kent, just outside London.
And his parents were pretty firmly middle class, right?
Not very. His dad, Lawrence, worked for the Michelin Tire Company, and his mother, Emily Mary, her family was deeply involved in missionary work.
And the sources really emphasize that their finances, or lack thereof, meant they had to live out in the countryside. That seems so crucial to who he became.
It's everything. He was an only child, and that rural setting became his first teacher, his first, philosophical laboratory.
He wasn't just playing outside, he was observing.
Deeply. He talks about spending hours just walking, observing wildflowers, identifying butterflies, just paying this meticulous attention to the patterns of the natural world. This wasn't a hobby. It was the beginning of his entire non-dualistic philosophy. Nature taught him interconnectedness.
And this spiritual curiosity, it started with his mother's religious family, but it took a sharp turn, didn't it, towards what he called the mysterious Far East.
It did. And it wasn't just about books. For him, the entry point was visual. It was the aesthetic.
What do you mean by that?
He was completely captivated by Chinese and Japanese art landscape paintings, wood block prints, embroideries that his mother had from her family's missionary connections. Those were the images that just unlocked his imagination.
And what was it about that art that grabbed him so intensely?
He used these wonderful words. He said it had clarity, transparency, and spaciousness. He felt that unlike a lot of Western art, these landscapes conveyed a sense of endless space. The subject and the empty space around it were equally important.
A visual metaphor for non-duality, basically.
Exactly. It's like the art seemed to float, which implied this lack of rigid definition. It was the opposite of the religion he was being taught in his boarding school.
Right. It was this very specific brand of Anglican Christianity that he found, and I love this quote, grim and maudlin.
I mean, could the contrast be any starker? On one hand, you have this rigid, guilt-ridden, dualistic religion, God versus man, soul versus body. And on the other, you have this art from the East that's offering expansive beauty and unity.
So as a teenager, he had to make a choice.
A very definitive choice. He felt he had to choose between the faith of his birth and this Eastern wisdom he was just devouring. And, well,
He chose Buddhism.
and he didn't just dip a toe in, he dove right in.
With this incredible zealous intensity. At just 16 years old, this is around 1931, he becomes the secretary of the London Buddhist Lodge.
16. That's amazing. It just shows you how headstrong and practical he was. But the most important thing is that he was a relentless autodidact. He never waited for a curriculum. He was reading everything: philosophy, psychology, history, and of course these ancient Zen texts.
And we can already see the seeds of his later, let's say, rascal nature in his choice of mentors.
Yes. The sources point to this guy, Dmitry Mitrinovich, who's described as a rascal guru.
I love that term.
And he was influenced by these esoteric Western thinkers, Gurdjieff and Uspensky. So this is really important. It shows that Watts wasn't just learning Buddhism, he was learning how to synthesize.
So he's already connecting Eastern thought not just to Western religion, but to the kind of rogue, psychological, esoteric fringes of the West.
Exactly. He's learning to see patterns across different traditions from the very beginning. It kind of pre-programmed him to not be loyal to any single dogma.
Which makes sense of what happened with his academic career.
Yeah.
Or lack thereof.
Yeah.
He had this shot at Oxford and completely fumbled it.
He really did. He won a scholarship to the King's School in Canterbury, a top-tier school. But when he sat the exam for a scholarship to Trinity College, Oxford,
he got too creative.
that's a good way of putting it. He admitted it himself. He wrote an essay that was so unconventional, it was just seen as presumptuous and capricious. He was too confident, too much himself to play the academic game.
So it cost him Oxford, but it preserved his intellectual freedom.
I think so. And despite that, he publishes his first book, The Spirit of Zen, in 1936. He's not even 21 yet.
And what's fascinating about that book is how he felt about it later.
Right. 20 years later, when he publishes his masterpiece, The Way of Zen, he basically throws that first book under the bus, calls it unscholarly and misleading.
That's some serious self-awareness.
It is. He says it was just a summary of the ideas of the man who would become his mentor, D.T. Suzuki.
Which brings us to this huge turning point, the 1936 World Congress of Faiths in London.
This is where the 21-year-old Watts meets the man himself. D.T. Suzuki was the academic voice of Zen in the West. Meeting him, hearing him speak, it just solidified everything for Watts.
This wasn't just an interest anymore.
No, this was his calling. And 2 years later, in 1938, he's on a boat to the United States. The intellectual adventurer had found his new continent. But the path he took next was not at all what you'd expect.
Right, so he gets to New York. He's now surrounded by this traditional Zen circle. His mother-in-law was deeply involved. His mentor is a Zen master named Sokayan Sasaki. The logical next step is, go full monk.
It's the logical step, yeah. But Watts, he was rarely logical in that way. He found the formal, strict monastic training. It just didn't suit him.
He wasn't a joiner.
Not in that way. The sources say he didn't want to be a monk. He wanted a vocational, a public, and intellectual outlet for all these ideas.
So instead of the monastery, he goes to the seminary. He enrolls in an Episcopal seminary in Illinois. I mean, that feels like such a hard pivot.
Well, it wasn't really a pivot. For him, it was another attempt at synthesis. He was convinced there was a mystical core to Christianity that had just been lost.
The part that wasn't grim and maudlin.
Exactly. He wanted to use his Eastern knowledge to strip away the dogma and find that universal truth he believed was at the heart of the Christian tradition, too.
And this becomes his master's thesis, which gets published in 1947 as Behold the Spirit.
And that book gets him established as a serious intellectual. He's ordained as an Episcopal priest in 1945. He actually served as a chaplain for a while.
But the sources are clear. He was always a philosopher first. He was never actually ordained as a Zen monk.
Never. And he keeps exploring this synthesis idea. In 1953, he publishes Myth and Ritual in Christianity, where he uses Eastern philosophy to sort of decode medieval Catholic rituals.
What was his argument there?
His thesis was that those old rituals contained profound psychological meaning, but that modern Christianity had just lost the key. It had become too literal, too dualistic. He saw parallels to Asian thought everywhere, but they were buried.
This detour as a priest, though, it was temporary. He leaves the priesthood by 1950, and the next big move is to California.
Yes. In 1951, he joins the faculty of the American Academy of Asian Studies in San Francisco. And this was his intellectual playground.
It must have been the perfect environment for him.
It really was. He was a professor and an administrator there until 57. The faculty was just this incredible mix of people, and his own interests just exploded.
It goes way beyond Zen at this point.
Oh, far beyond. He's absorbing Vedanta, the new physics, quantum mechanics, relativity process, philosophy, anthropology of sexuality. He's trying to synthesize the entire intellectual world of the 1950s.
And there are two areas that you said were absolutely critical for what he does next.
Yeah.
General semantics and cybernetics.
Yes. These are the tools that allow him to modernize ancient wisdom for a new generation. He's reading Alfred Korzybski, who's famous for the idea that the map is not the territory.
And Norbert Wiener, the father of cybernetics.
Exactly. Cybernetics is the science of control and communication in systems, whether they're machines or animals.
Okay, I have to stop you. Why is a spiritual philosopher getting deep into cybernetics? That just seems like such an odd turn.
It was a stroke of genius, really. Cybernetics, with its focus on feedback loops, gave him a scientific, non-mystical language to talk about interdependence.
To talk about non-duality.
Precisely. He saw the human body, the nervous system, and the outside world as one single, massive, interconnected feedback system. It gave him the technical vocabulary to dismantle the idea of the skin-encapsulated ego.
So we could say, look, science itself is proving that the organism and its environment are not separate things.
Yes. It's one system. That was a revolutionary intellectual leap. And at the same time, he's deepening his artistic side. He studies Chinese calligraphy with a scholar named Saburo Hasegawa.
Which wasn't just about learning to write.
No. Through calligraphy, he learned about the Japanese perception of nature, of spontaneity, of embracing accident in art. It showed him that philosophy wasn't just an idea in your head. It was an aesthetic. It was an applied, holistic way of living.
So this period of the academy gives him all the tools he needs. The philosophy, the aesthetics, and now these scientific analogies to communicate it all to the masses.
And that's exactly what he does next.
He leaves the academy around 1957, but he's already found the medium that's going to make him famous. Radio.
In 1953, he starts this weekly, unpaid, volunteer radio program on KPFA in Berkeley, a Pacifica station.
And his voice was just perfect for it. That warm, articulate, slightly British conversational style.
It was. And those broadcasts, which ran until 1962, they attracted what the sources call a legion of regular listeners. The Bay Area was already this hotbed of new ideas, and he became the voice of it.
And the legacy of those shows is it's monumental. They were recorded, they're still broadcast today, and now they're all over YouTube and streaming services. That's what cemented him as an auditory philosopher.
Absolutely. And that radio fame happens at the exact same time as his landmark book, 1957, The Way of Zen.
Which was so much more than a book. It was a cultural event.
Yeah.
One of the first ever bestsellers on Buddhism. It was basically the instruction manual for the Beat generation.
It really was. For Kerouac, for Ginsberg, for Snyder. While they were exploring spontaneity and freedom from social norms, Watts gave them the philosophical framework. He validated their rebellion as a genuine spiritual quest.
So what made the Way of Zen so different? We touched on it, but how did he use those modern analogies you mentioned?
This is the core of his genius. He knew that a Western audience, which was becoming more and more scientific, would be wary of purely mystical language. So he used their language. He used semantics and cybernetics.
So with semantics, he used that idea, the map is not the territory, to explain Zen.
Yes. He argued that our language, especially English, forces us into a dualistic view of the world. We have to have a subject and a verb. I see the tree. That little sentence grammatically separates the I from the tree.
But Zen would say that separation is just a trick of the language.
Exactly. Watts saw Zen as a way to get beyond the mental traps of our own grammar. It was a way to experience reality directly, before you slap a label or a category on it.
And then there's cybernetics. How did he use the idea of a feedback loop to explain enlightenment?
He argued that our nervous system is just this incredibly complex feedback loop. When you think you're an ego inside your skin, you're misidentifying where the control is.
So the feeling of I am controlling my body is an illusion.
It's a misplacing of the boundary. He'd say, think of a thermostat. It gets data from the room, it's cold, and it turns on the furnace. But that action changes the room, which feeds back new data, which prompts a new action. The thermostat and the room are one single operating system.
And he applied that to us.
He said, we are the same. We don't come into the world, we come out of it, like a wave comes out of the ocean. The wave and the ocean are one system. Cybernetics was the modern technical proof of that ancient idea.
It's brilliant. It made Zen feel cutting edge, not ancient.
And the establishment even started to recognize him, even though he was an outsider. He got an honorary Doctor of Divinity degree in 1958.
Which is pretty ironic for a guy who'd quit the priesthood and was teaching a non-theistic philosophy.
Very. And he toured Europe. He met Carl Jung. He then mastered television with 2 seasons of a show for public TV called Eastern Wisdom and Modern Life.
He was everywhere.
Yeah.
And all this fame forced him to define what he was. Not a guru, not a professor. He chose philosophical entertainer.
And that term is so important. He rejected the seriousness and the moral baggage of a title like guru. He knew his own flaws, which we'll get to. He saw his job as catalyzing thought, not leading a flock of devotees.
And the entertainer part speaks to his style. It was witty, it was accessible, it was full of memorable analogies.
He knew he was an outsider to academia, and he leaned into it. He knew that freedom from the institution allowed him to speak directly to you, the listener, and your own spiritual hunger.
And this is where he fully syncs up with the counterculture he's helping to create, his exploration of altered states of consciousness.
Right. Starting in the mid-50s, he gets very interested in using psychedelic drugs for mystical insight. He wrote about it in The New Alchemy and then, more famously, in The Joyous Cosmology in 1962.
He experimented with mescaline, LSD.
With research teams, yes, and also cannabis, but he was much more cautious than, say, Timothy Leary. He had that famous analogy about psychedelics.
If you get the message, hang up the phone.
That's the one. It's a perfect summary of his view. He saw them as instruments, like a microscope or a telephone. Use them to get an insight, but you don't stay glued to them forever.
The insight is the point, not the drug.
Right. The biologist does not sit with eye permanently glued to the microscope. He goes away and works on what he has seen. They can show you reality, but they are not reality itself.
And all this exploration, whether through drugs or meditation, it leads him to articulate his complete worldview. This is the core of his philosophy, which you find in books like the book, on the taboo against knowing who you are.
This is where he weaves it all together. Hinduism, Taoism, Western science, into this grand unified theory, and it starts with a fundamental attack on the Western idea of identity.
The skin-encapsulated ego.
That myth, as he called it. The idea that you are a little isolated consciousness stuck behind your eyes, constantly fighting to control your body and the world around you. He thought this idea was the source of all our anxiety.
So what's the alternative he offers?
The alternative is a grand cosmic game. He pulls from Hindu concepts like Leela and Maya.
Explain that.
Okay, so he posits that the universe is fundamentally one single consciousness. He just called it IT. And this IT is playing a massive game of hide and seek with itself.
So Leela is the game, hide and seek.
And Maya, or illusion, is the hiding. The cosmic self hides from itself by becoming everything in the universe. Stars, mountains, butterflies, you, me, and then this is the key part, deliberately forgetting that it's all one.
So the point of life, then, is to remember.
To wake up. To realize that your individual self, your ego, is just IT wearing a disguise. The ultimate realization is what the Hindus call tat tavam asi. Thou art that. You are not a separate part fighting the universe. You are the universe experiencing itself.
And he connects this huge cosmic idea back to those patterns he saw in nature as a kid.
Yes, the fractal patterns, the branching of a tree, the shape of a galaxy, the coastline. He saw those repeating patterns as the visual signature of the cosmic self, proving that the smallest part reflects the whole.
Which means that all those opposites we struggle with, life and death, good and bad, they're not really opposites.
They're two sides of the same coin. They're the necessary tension that makes the game possible. For Watts, understanding that the contradiction of opposites is the fundamental method of life. That's the key to peace.
And in his later years, he really tried to make this practical.
He did. He called himself a Zenist in spirit. His last book was Tao, The Watercourse Way. And he was focused on how you apply these ideas to child rearing.
He was trying to bring the philosophy out of the clouds and into the kitchen.
Exactly. Dissolving that boundary between the sacred and the everyday. And if you really believe you're the universe, then you have to treat the universe with respect, which naturally led him to social ethics and the environment.
He was so ahead of his time on that, talking about an ecological predicament way back in the early 60s.
Incredibly prescient. He argued that our spiritual belief that man is separate from nature is what allows us to destroy it without feeling like we're harming ourselves.
He had that amazing quote about our consumerism, about the ever-rising mountains of ruin.
Especially when the things we make and build are beginning to look more and more like rubbish even before they're thrown away. He saw our industrial output becoming trash in real time.
Okay, so now we have to get into the complexity of the man himself. Because for any honest deep dive, you have to talk about the contradictions. The entertainer who was also, as the sources say, a bit of a rogue.
A bit of a rogue is putting it mildly. He was open about it in his autobiography, In My Own Way. He calls himself a sedentary and contemplative character, a mystic and also somewhat of a disreputable Epicurean who has 3 wives, 7 children, and 5 grandchildren.
That disreputable Epicurean part is doing a lot of work. The sources confirm he struggled. 3 marriages, 7 kids, a lot of conflict. And he had issues with substance use.
He was a heavy smoker his whole life, and after the mid-50s, he developed a serious problem with alcohol.
And people close to him called him out on it. His lover, the poet Jean Burden, she called him a rogue and pointed out his moral hypocrisy.
Right, and this is the central tension of his legacy. How could the great philosopher of non-duality live such a messy, dualistic personal life?
But his family defended him. His daughter Anne admitted that people knocked him off the pedestal when they learned about the alcoholism and womanizing, but she insisted the work stands on its own.
And that's the big question for you, for the listener. Can you separate the message from the messenger? This played out in the Zen community itself with a huge backlash from formal practitioners.
They felt he was all talk, no walk.
Pretty much. The core criticism was his dismissal of Zazen, formal sitting meditation. Masters like Philip Kapleau, even D.T. Suzuki to some extent, they felt he was misinterpreting key concepts.
Just getting a superficial intellectual understanding.
Exactly. They hated his casual approach. He famously said Zazen was just sitting but not sitting, but critics said he only understood half a koan. He was using it to justify not doing the hard work.
And his most infamous quote about it was,
"A cat sits until it is tired of sitting, then gets up, stretches, and walks away."
which to a Zen master must have sounded like an endorsement for just being lazy.
It was seen as offering an easy way out, a Zen light for people who wanted the philosophy without the discipline. The prominent Zen teacher, Robert Aitken, said that D.T. Suzuki himself told him flat out, Mr. Watts did not understand that story.
Ouch. But he had his defenders too. And a very powerful one.
A very powerful one. Shunryu Suzuki, the founder of the San Francisco Zen Center, a man famous for his rigor. When one of his students dismissed Watts, Suzuki apparently got very serious and called Watts a great bodhisattva.
A bodhisattva, wow.
Yeah, he insisted the student was missing the point, that Watts's vital work was opening the door for countless Westerners who would have never found it otherwise.
So his mission was dissemination, not discipline. It was about building that bridge.
And his life ended in 1973. He was only 58. And the circumstances of his death are almost like a final Zen teaching.
He'd just gotten back from this grueling European lecture tour.
Right, he was exhausted. He died in his cabin in Druid Heights, California. But what happened next was unusual.
His body was cremated almost immediately on a wood pyre on Muir Beach by Buddhist monks before the authorities could even get there.
His son Mark later found out that his father had planned the whole thing meticulously. It was this deliberate, immediate return to nature, a final act of letting go. His wife, Mary Jane, said of him, "The secret of life is knowing when to stop."
And he stopped on his own terms. He's gone, but that cultural echo is louder than ever. All the music sampling, the movies. He provided the language for questioning reality, and that's a quest more people are on today than ever before.
He was a philosopher who mastered audio. He recorded these talks that have become, in a way, a new kind of scripture for people seeking accessible wisdom outside of any institution.
So, wrapping this all up, what's the final takeaway?
Yeah.
Alan Watts' singular achievement was, what? Taking Eastern philosophy out of the temple and putting it on the airwaves.
I think so, making the profound accessible, making non-duality understandable to a profoundly dualistic and anxious Western culture. He was that crucial bridge.
And he did it by trying to resolve that feeling of alienation, by insisting that you aren't just this fragile little ego, but an inseparable part of the whole cosmic dance.
Exactly. That understanding the contradiction of opposites, up and down, life and death, that's the key. That's the path to real psychological peace.
Which brings us right back to the man himself, the entertainer and the rogue, the mystic and the alcoholic. If Watts taught that the contradiction of opposites is the fundamental method of life,
then what does it mean for us that his most profound, most liberating teachings came directly from his own deeply flawed, contradictory, and troubled personal life?
it makes you wonder. Was the rascal nature essential to his role as the entertainer? Did it allow him to sidestep the kind of spiritual arrogance that can come with being a pure teacher?
He delivered this message of cosmic unity through a very messy, very human vessel.
So we'll leave you with that provocative thought. Maybe the pursuit of this kind of transcendental knowledge can't be separated from the messy reality of the person pursuing it. Maybe the contradictions in Watts's life weren't a flaw in his teaching, but were actually the final, human, complicated evidence of it, something to mull over until our next deep dive.